before we get there, I want to give it like a little teaching because, see, Christians, again, want to blame God for everything. Do you know that the people in Ukraine didn't create this war? Did you know that things are happening to people in Ukraine? It's not God's plan, not God's intention. But do you know, in the middle of not God's plan and not God's intention, people can seek the Lord, find the Lord. That's why, to me, I find it so amazing that our church, having preached the gospel in Ukraine for 30-some years, and we're about to send, another year, because I didn't know, are your radio stations still going or are they not going? But I guarantee you, in the early years, hundreds and hundreds came to Christ because of our radio program. And my guess is in the last 2 or 3 years, last year or so, there's been a whole lot more come to Christ. But see, they didn't create that. The world created it. Yeah, you could blame the devil. The devil's a little bit behind it, but it's really the world. If you see the problem, the devil plays off the world. One time they said to Jesus, they were asking him about certain things, why they happened, and he didn't answer because some things we'll never know until we find out. But he did teach about accidents. And what he said was, did you hear about a tower? So there must have been a tower at the time of Jesus that had fallen over. And he said those people were killed when that tower fell over. And then he goes on to say, do you think that they were something more wrong with them, the people that died in the tower, than people that didn't die in the tower? And of course, the answer is no. The answer is Jesus was giving us a little insight into there's accidents. In this world, you're going to have trials. Now, many of you know a little bit about the story, but what happened was, I thought it was last Christmas. She thinks it's 3 years ago. Steve thinks it's 2 years ago. So we call, there's things that were BC, before COVID, and then it seems like time has really messed up since COVID, so we don't know whether it's last year or 2 years or 3 years ago. But one December night, because you hopefully have all read this tract, and this is Steve's story from Steve's angle, and my connection to this story is that I knew Steve's dad extremely well, Dwayne and Bill Eakins. They were both deacons on the church God told me to go and serve, and I was a deacon there too. And these were outstanding people. Of course, Steve was shorter and cuter in those days, okay? And God did a great thing as Steve brought pretty well his whole family into the church, and they all got saved. And so my only involvement was I was at Selwyn, and then Steve's dad went up north, and Steve's dad and his mom began to really move in the Spirit. In the church here, they were strong in the Lord, but they began to really move in the Spirit. And I ran into them one time, and I was so excited about what was going on. And then suddenly, I hear about this accident. And again, as you know, a bus hits a carload of people, and they die. But I knew Bill and his wife. I knew Dwayne, his wife, and so this is Steve's story. So even though we always talk about Steve's story, we knew there was another side to the story. But see, it's not my job to tell someone else's story. And everybody gets a chance to tell their own story at their own time. So last Sunday night, I think it was, I was talking to Lynn, and I was talking about how impressed and how beautiful that was on the night one Christmas, one December, 2 years, 3 years, 1 year ago, whenever it was, when she stood up and she shared how God gave her Christmas. I'm going to get her to share that a little bit. Because again, and Todd's here tonight, and Lynn and Todd are husband and wife, and Steve and Lynn used to be husband and wife, but they're still friends. And this is what Christ does. Christ, he's the only one that I know can make something good out of something not good. And so clearly this was an accident. Clearly it was horrendous. I prayed for that church. I prayed for everybody, but I couldn't call anybody because I said, Lord, unless you tell me, there's no words to say. And yet I have had the privilege of having Bill here and Dwayne here, Steve here, and his family here, and Lynn here over a lot of years. And so I know many were caring and praying, but these people had to walk through something awful, something none of us want to ever walk through. So again, it's not Steve's story, but there's another side to the story, and I'm going to ask Lynn to come up, and I'm going to get her to tell us, first of all, how God gave her Christmas back as she stood up one Sunday evening to tell us about the hurts that God had set free. So Lynn, come on up on stage. Let's give her a Selwyn welcome. Now, I can't really be angry at Lynn ever, because now maybe I will be. Who knows what she does to tick me off tonight. But she invited Jane to the church. And she invited Jane to the church 20 years ago. And Jane told me that she was coming to the church all that time. And I said, you were not coming to the church. But I guess Jane was right and I was wrong, because down in her drawer, she pulled out a bulletin because Jane has all the bulletins from those years. And so she had documentation that I was wrong. So, see, Lynn said, Jane, you need to get out to that church because there's a man that needs to meet you. I mean, I don't know that that's what you said.
Not quite.
Not quite. You wanted her to know Jesus. So a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, tell us first about the Christmas, and then we'll ask questions, because I said I want to kind of do an interview, and then you can.
Sure. Well, it was whenever it was. I was here, and it was a Sunday night, and I was just came from work, and there was a girl that I worked with who was engaged, Kim Eakins. Her mother was in the car and was killed. And Kim was so excited that Christmas was coming. She was in a good place, engaged or something, and happy about everything. And I thought, I have no right to not be happy at Christmas time if that little girl who lost her mom can be joyous at Christmas. It just seemed to change something inside me, and I was like, I'm free to enjoy Christmas too. It was like just revolutionary in my mind that I thought I would be just kind of, not cursed, but just constantly reminded every Christmas that it was not going to be a great time until it had kind of passed, and I looked at December like it was terrible.
Because Mac, your son,
Right.
On December 18th?
Yes, well, first, his father had died late November, and then Mac, he had his first birthday, December 4th, and then 2 weeks later, he was killed. And so it was just sort of one of those times, you may have gone through a time where it's so heavy, the emotions, and I just felt like until the date of the accident's December 18th, 1 week before Christmas, and so until that day was over with, I didn't feel free to set up Christmas For
all these years later, all these years, how many years is it?
It's 36 years now.
So every year you had to fight through December, but for your other kids.
Yeah, and like Steve and I have 3 of our own children now, and it was always, I was excited about Christmas, and then I wouldn't be, and then I would be, and it just was, it was painful, but it's not now. It's not now.
And that's what you confessed that night, that God had given you back Christmas, because you had to still be mom and have a good Christmas. So you would pretend it wasn't that date until, was it the 18th or the 19th that you let yourself?
The 19th, I would snap out of it. But I would kind of mourn and wallow a little and, not in a healthy way. And I knew better, but I couldn't convince my heart until I watched this wonderful girl say she was excited about Christmas, and I thought, I've got no right to wallow anymore. And it was just like Jesus went, yeah, I've been waiting for you to get that. And I was free to just go, Christmas time, wow.
Come on, let's say it, Christmas time, wow.
Wow, yeah, it's Jesus' birthday. I mean, I was also blessed with the idea that Mac didn't travel to heaven alone. He had really good company. I mean, I don't know if you know how it is when you die and what the greet is to get you to heaven and Jesus, angels, whatever. But for me, there was Grandma and Uncle Tim and, this lovely lady Barb, and they all, ushered in the new year together. And it was hard. I'm not saying it wasn't, but funnily enough, God put it on me to never, ever think, why me? Why us? That was never a thought I had. I mean, I had become a Christian that year. I had been baptized in November. And
Just the month before.
yeah. So I was just like, you know, I was okay in a weird way. Steve and I remember talking about 3 weeks after the accident, walking down the street, holding hands and laughing about something. And we thought, oh, if anybody knew us or knew what we'd been through, and here we are laughing, they'd think we're nuts. But we still had a sense of awe, joy. I mean, I felt more sad for Steve because in his life, it was his first real kick in the belly. And my life had been marked by that since I was born. Loving home, but I was sinned against often in every kind of abuse imaginable. And I was a runawayer. And I ran and I ran and I just wanted to get away from how I felt all the time. And I was a brat. I wanted my way. I wanted to feel better. I mean, that's where, substance abuse came into the picture. And I mean, when I was 15, my mother died. She had a heart attack, and in 1980, she was 40. And subsequently, a few months later, my little brother set the house on fire, and it burned to the ground on April Fool's Day. And I just kind of checked out. And it was all about me at that point. And I left my family to deal with my father's alcoholism and problems. I just left them and hoped for the best. And my selfish ways took me, again, running away from my pain, running away from life. And I ended up out west and got fired from a good job at the Banff Springs Hotel and ended up in Florida, hitchhiked everywhere. I just loved the danger of it, I guess. And that's where I met this man. And he was mixed up with the cartel.
So this is the part that I'm happy because we wanted her. I knew some of her story because the reason for this story is so that you can know you can get through things.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you weren't actually in Canada when the baby died, when Mac died, because you were down involved in a court case, I think with FBI. So,
well, when I got pregnant, my man got involved with the Drug Enforcement Agency and was going to get relocation going for our safety.
Because he was going to give evidence against a cartel of drug dealers.
Yes. So in the 9th month, I was supposed to have Mac in December, and in the 9th month is when he went on the last deal, and he never came back. And I will keep this PG, but he was found a week or so later in the trunk of a car. And there's details, that's enough. The thing is that when he died, I had Mac in a hospital, and this man, John, helped me get enough money and whatnot to come back to Canada. And Steve had already heard about me and the baby, and his church was already praying for me before I ever met him. I was in Canada 2 days when I met Steve, and he was a friend of my sister, and he was just such a nice guy. Really nice, like too nice to hang out with me. Like he was kind of, vanilla, and I was like black cherry over here. So I don't know. But he was so wonderful.
We get it. That's a good illustration.
He was very sweet and innocent, and I just wasn't. And needless to say, the police got a hold of me from down in the States, and they came up and they polygraphed and wanted to make sure I didn't kill him or have anything to do with my man's murder, and got the ball rolling for me to go to court to testify, which was December 18th. I'm down in St. Louis with Ken Jackman, the police chief here in Peterborough. He was my bodyguard. And the accident happened, and I had been out sightseeing and walked back in the hotel, and there he is saying, we got to go back to Canada. He told me why. And Lynn, on a usual basis, goes numb. I don't even know if I cried right away. I just was like, okay. I phoned Steve. He answers the phone. How was your trip? And I'm like, he doesn't know. And I continued to tell him what had happened to his family, because I knew before he did, because of Ken being the police, he knew quick. And Steve was worried about me because I'd had my fill of life, and he thought I had one more thing burdened to me, where I was worried about him because he's just too innocent and sweet for this terrible thing that happened to him. And
I want you to know that he's in the editing room, and we said it's a good night that for him to be in the editing room. That's a good place to be tonight.
I know. I already went up and hugged him. But needless to say, when, I was already saved, and I never had that poor me thing come over me. In fact, sure, I was sad. I bawled and I fell apart and I got, hammered. I did all the things I would normally do to cope, right?
Because this was also your family, wasn't it? It was Mac, but it was also, you had now been adopted. Oh, yeah. You had now been adopted by Steve's family, and they considered you one of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, at first Steve's mom really tried to keep us apart for a while, but she got used to me. But because as a new Christian, you know how new Christians are. They're so on fire, and they love Jesus, and they're crazy like Rick and Jamie back there. And just like, I was just so on fire, and I really fought my whole life not to lose that. And so this getting free over the last couple of years has really influenced my happiness, the joy that I have. And I see where Jesus was so dedicated to me. He wouldn't let me go. He kept me in a place where it's hard to explain, but there was a love affair between us that was staying constant. And the only time there wasn't is if I went, and that would be all it would take for me to probably ruin my life for another month or two with silly, selfish behavior. But it also took 1 second to come back. And every time I look back at Jesus, he was just waiting for me. He never, it's not like I had to strive and get back in his good graces. I don't have time to be ashamed. I don't have time for guilt. The things that I did to Steve in order to ruin our marriage was just Lynn out of control. But he's forgiven me. And, and I've forgiven him, whatever it may be. But, he's my very best friend today. And when my husband got saved 7 years ago, there's Todd and Steve and
beautiful. Learning
about each other in a different way instead of being like the ex and the new one. It was really beautiful. And even my kids, I remember they were saying, Todd got saved. If Todd can get saved, anybody can. It was just because, there was just so much things going on in our world, and it's just so beautiful now. When Steve made this, I was so thrilled that I have used this. We went out to a Christmas party last night. There's 2 other couples at our table. They both ended up with one before I left, because it's so easy for me to say, oh, and look at my pictures in there, see? And we're talking, and now you know who I am, and now I want to tell you a story. It's wonderful that this was made. The thing that blows my mind, though, is at the bottom where Steve wrote, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me to proclaim good news, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and prisoners, and provide for those who grieve, to bestow on them the crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and the garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. They will be called a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." I just read that the other day and got it. And I read it 1,000 times. The idea that when my son died, I had to leave him at Jesus' feet, covered by the blood. When anything happens in my world and I take it to Jesus and I leave it at his feet covered in the blood, it becomes a planting, and it's like a garden, and it's to show the splendor of God's glory. So I give him all of it. And when you give him all of it, you create a garden of splendor for his glory. And I believe that that's something he's going to show me one day.
The neat thing about this, and again, we don't take away from it's a real tragedy, but the neat thing is that your testimony, and Steve, gives Mac a voice. His story, his life is being used to touch people right now. Steve's mom, who was like a mom to you, an aunt, even though she was a close friend, she was like an aunt, Barbara. And then of course Tim. But their life is not. They're not on the earth, but their influence is not gone because their story is being declared by you. Plus, God's used you to help a lot of people come through a lot of hurts, right, and addictions.
Just about that, about the testimony that Mac has had over the last 36 years, I've heard people say that, they had an abortion, it was a shame. Or somebody died too young, they should have lived to be 100, and we should all have old days. Well, you know what? I'm not going Bible on this, but I'm going to say that every single person who lives and dies at whatever age that they live and die at, I look at, honestly, like they fulfilled their purpose, whatever it may be, because in order for me to swallow the truth sometimes, I have to kind of put my slant on it. And the thing of it is that every last person has a testimony. And all the babies that have been lost, and including mine, and all the people that go too soon, children, teenagers, suicide, it's up to the people that survive that to bring out the testimony of their life. I owe Mac the testimony of his life, because what he did for me, it's hard because when my mom died and the house burned down, life was erased. When Ira died and the baby died, that part of life was erased. I started to feel like my life just kept getting erased. And the testimony makes it so they're not erased. They're not erased. They're very important. Their existence plays into my today, but it doesn't own my today. It just enhances it. It's a different thing. And I open my Bible to the Beatitudes because we've all heard the Beatitudes, but let me tell you, they were written for Lynn. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled, and I think filled fast, actually. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And they persecuted Jesus. To me, when I remember those words, like I said, they're written for me. I'm so comforted by those particular words, probably more than anything else I can read. And I had other scriptures and stuff too, but to carry on, hoping to be a better mother with my kids than I was with Mac, because I was still learning, right? And I really wasn't that much better of a mother, but to God's glory, look at those kids I have. Mike and Brittany are here tonight, supporting me and loving me, despite me. And God's glory and his splendor is all over my existence. It's all over my life. And I got a so-called bad diagnosis a couple of years ago, and I haven't been sick once, and God's been so good to me, and I've gotten to spend so much time seeing 3 of my grandchildren born. Like, there's things about my life that are so sweet. And to be able to marry someone after losing someone, and after having to lose Steve because I blew it, and now I get to be with somebody that we've been together 22 years, and
he's in church supporting you tonight too.
He's in church holding my hand, and I get to have a love of my life again. And I didn't think I would. Like, there's a kind of like a place where I thought, like without God's in there, I would think that I don't deserve anything that great. And he is so wonderful and supportive. And we just have this existence where the Lord's in our home, and the Lord's in my grandchildren, and I have so many great friends here that it makes it really hard. If I'm not here, I ache. I get a stomach ache because I miss it so much.
I want to thank you.
And I love you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask your family to stay seated. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody else, if you can, to stand up, because I don't want to embarrass them to stand up. But God says things are not done yet. Come on, say things are not finished. This is a redemption story, right? It's a redemption story, whether it be love of her life, redemption, God returning, but it's not done yet. The multiplication, even this testimony, depending on how you give us permission to use it, but you've given us the other side. We've been waiting because it's got to be your time, and I know you've given it within certain contexts and certain groups, but you've shared it with us, and you've opened yourself up, and you've blessed us with your life. And so everybody else can be seated, but you can't because you're up here, and we're just going to, Lord, let's just lift our hands to heaven. We're not going to lift our hands towards, Lord, thank you for this family. Multi-sided, multi-generational, challenges beyond what most of us have ever experienced or imagined, but you're still God. Let God arise and his enemies be scattered. Let God arise. And we declare over this multiple-sided family, not just because of this side, but for many different reasons, their ministry, their effectiveness, their influence, and their destiny will go to the north, south, east, and west. Come on. Can you say amen with me, folks? Amen. Amen.